Hi, and welcome to Grit, Guts, and Grappling, the trifecta for writing success. I'm Amber Parks, the Director of Writing with Design. And in today's session, what we're going to be looking at is kind of the go-to steps and strategies for students to know for the writing assessment here in Oklahoma. So this is really intended for 5th and 8th graders, but it certainly applies for all grade levels and all writers in the sense that these steps and strategies are exactly what we want to be seeing happening in every classroom with every student and also around every kitchen table as children are working on their homework with families. So let's dive right in. What I want to begin with is just kind of giving us a sense of what would happen if we applied the same terminology or the same activities that we do to writing into other subjects. So for example, would you ever hear a teacher say, just math for 20 minutes, right? Get out a sheet of paper and I just want you to math. You can math about anything you want. Right? Students would look at them like they've lost their mind and say, I don't know what to math about. Do you want me to add? Do you want me to multiply? And yet we do that with writing, right? There's a lot of very open-ended writing assignments that are given to students, even prompts that just say write an informational report. Well, about what? How do I do that? How do I get started? Blank sheets of paper are a hard way to begin writing. And think about in science. If students went into the science lab and the directions were, oh, there's some Bunsen burners and there's some chemicals and just science, right? Sometimes students might walk out without their eyebrows anymore. So that's not a great way of letting students just go free in a science lab. And yet that's a lot of times what we think about with writing, that any type of structure, any type of set steps is going to rob our students of their creativity. And honestly, it's the opposite. There are steps, there are structures, there are organizational pieces to all different types of writing, even the most creative types. And the more that we teach students those specific strategies, the more that they get to pick and choose from their bank of knowledge of writing and find their voice as writers. So one thing we like to say in writing with design is steps and structure lead to creativity. So one big takeaway from our session today is going to be that there is nothing more intimidating than a blank sheet of paper and the directions right. And so how do we get away from that? What are kind of the go-to just every time I write, what do I need to do steps for students? And that's what we're going to talk through today. So again, this is definitely for 5th and 8th graders in terms of state assessments coming up, but more importantly, it's for all students in terms of the thinking processes that are involved, in terms of the grit and the guts and the grappling that's needed to become a great writer. So everything that's in here can be done at every grade level, just with maybe more family and teacher support versus more independently as we get up in the grade levels. So this is why it's so important. This is a chart showing the real versus ideal growth as writers that we have gleaned from data all over the country for many years. And what unfortunately happens is that the quality of student writing, while we hope it will increase as students go up in grades, it actually stagnates at about the 2nd grade, meaning word choice and sentence structure and organization really doesn't improve for a lot of students as they go up in the grades. They might be able to write about more complex topics, but the quality of the writing, the impressiveness of what's on the paper doesn't really improve as much as we want to be seeing. So that's where writing with design really steps in and says, how do we teach the pieces of writing, the strategies that great writers use to students at every grade level so that they too can become incredible writers? So that's what we're going to dive into, the steps in planning to planning and organizing informational and argumentative. So we won't address narratives in this session, but we will talk about how can I, in 2 out of the 3 domains of writing, plan and organize and kind of see how my writing can come together. So the very first thing we want students to do is literally to draw this on a sheet of paper. They put a topic in the middle or the source of information they're using. Where are they gathering information goes in a box in the middle, and then they just draw a few lines out. It doesn't have to be this set number of lines. It can be 3 lines, but the goal is just that there's some lines coming off of the box in the middle, and that's just to start to invite their brains to say, what am I reading about? What are some takeaway points from paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 and paragraph 3? So this this visual, just a box with some lines coming out, is the beginning of our brainstorming design. And that's where we put lots and lots of bubbles of information. So here's how we divide it if we have two sources and you want to keep it on the same sheet. But families and students, please know that you could have separate sheets of paper for each of the sources that you are reading or using for your research. So it doesn't have to be on the same sheet, but I just want to show you, we just draw a big line down the middle to divide it. And then we've got source 1 and source 2, where we would say what the title of the article was, or what the video was that we used, whatever the source is, we want to identify it so we can pull that into our writing. But this is a nice way to keep it on one sheet and just kind of have all your information in one place. But again, 2 sheets of paper right next to each other, or sometimes there's 7 sources, and that would be a lot for one sheet. So you will need more sheets of paper to just jot down all of the passage notes, direct quotations, key points, statistics, examples, all those key things from the articles and other sources that you want to include into your writing. So this is just an example of what it looks like when it's got lots of bubbles on it. So each of these details would be specific pieces of information. Again, they might be some direct quotations that come out of a piece, but there are lots of great key pieces of information from the sources that we want to put into our writing. And a couple pro tips to talk about. One is to write in phrases and fragments. We don't want single words in the bubbles, but we also aren't looking for complete sentences. So be somewhere in the middle. Phrases and sentence fragments are wonderful instigators or starters for building paragraphs or kind of clustering ideas. Full sentences in these bubbles just becomes too much. And single words, if it doesn't really tell us what about that topic we are wanting to put into a full sentence. So phrases are great. And then the other pro tip is just to go sentence by sentence in shorter passages. So after the first sentence, let's say, what's important from that? Let's change it into our own words and put it in a bubble. Or go passage by paragraph by paragraph in a longer passage. So just not reading the takeaway is don't read the whole article, don't watch the whole video and then try to remember everything. You can certainly do that initially if you've got lots of time and love that step, but what I encourage is you just go paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, break it down into manageable chunks that we can stop and say, okay, did I understand that? And what's my takeaway? And let's put it in our own words and put it into the bubbles. And that just will help fill this up with really good information, and it will make it manageable rather than going through the whole thing and then trying to recall from the very beginning what we read. All right, so this is just what it looks like if it's with the 2 sources divided in half. Sometimes there might be more from one than the other, and that's perfectly okay. We're not looking for balance or symmetry. This is not supposed to be pretty in the sense of the way it looks. It's just our ideas. It's the building blocks that we're going to use to then make our beautiful and impressive piece of writing. So step number 2 is where the grappling comes in, right? Where we want to start to see, how can I connect these bubbles, right? How can I connect these dots into more organized groupings? And that is the beginning of paragraphs. So we want students to kind of think about like, oh, this bubble and that bubble go together. So I'm going to put 2 stars on them because they're connected. Or you see the ones with the hearts. Yeah, they go together. They were related to the same topic here. Oh, there's 3 here that are all connected that I could put squares on that. Oh, and then I see one more that could have a star that goes. And then this one bubble, it just doesn't fit. There's nothing connected to the others. It may not make the final cut for the essay. So it's there. I researched it. I read about it, but it may not be what I finally include in my writing. So the shapes or colors or both are ways of just starting to see connections between the bubbles, to see bigger categories of information. And bigger categories of information is another way of saying grouping into paragraphs. But this is the most organic way for students to say, let me just get all these dots or bubbles out of what I learned, what I remember from these articles as I go sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, 10-second by 10-second in videos. And then I'm going to look for connections. And then From there, we might have some that can connect in more than one way. So you see the one bubble right up at the top and center that has a heart and a square. So that means it could go in two separate paragraphs here, right? If there's a paragraph with the heart bubbles, there's a paragraph with the square bubbles. I've got to decide where this one goes that's got both of them on it. So that's the really powerful way of just having students look at all of the details and think about, how could I put them together? What makes sense? What could be grouped? And please encourage your children to do this more than one way. So this is one organizational structure, but how could I rearrange these bubbles into a totally different way? And that keeps them fluid and flexible and seeing the connections rather than thinking of, I got to get the right answer. So from the brainstorming design, what we go to next is our classifying design. And you're hearing all these design names. This is the basis of writing with design. We have what we call mind designs. And these are visuals that help our brains process and visualize thinking and information. So we have the brainstorming design with the bubbles. You just put lots of bubbles all over, get your ideas down. And then we come into this one that kind of branches out into different columns. And this is what we call our classifying design. So you can see here, we've got on the left, one that has the topic at the top, and then it goes into two branches here with two main ideas and then detail sentences. And you can see that we just pulled the star grouping and the square grouping of information. There's also another way, right? So just again, keeping our children fluid, keeping students thinking about, well, is that the only way I could write? Or is that the best way to write about this information? You can see on the right, we've got 3 paragraphs now with about 2 sentences each. Sometimes it might have more. It doesn't have to be this balanced in terms of what you're seeing on the screen. But we've got the stars, the hearts, and the squares as 3 different categories of now paragraphs. And so the detail sentences come straight from the bubbles, right? So they've already got all those bubbles. They've already done all that hard work of researching. So we're just going to take the information from each of those bubbles and put it into this classifying design. Students can even cut and paste. So they don't even have to rewrite the bubbles. They just cut out the bubbles and then they glue it down onto another sheet of paper in this classifying design. That's actually one of my favorite ways to do this because rewriting sets off alarms in our children's head. And I'm not a fan of it either. Even though I'm a writing coach, I don't like to write for frivolous purposes. And if I've already written it once, there's no reason for me to write it again. So just let them cut it out. Teachers, this is a fabulous tip. Parents as well. Let them cut out their bubbles and then tape them down on another sheet of paper. We call it paper surgery in writing with design, and it just keeps them focused and very much enjoying the process rather than, I got to write this again. Plus, it saves time. All right, so step 4 is called write out loud. And this is a fancy way of saying, let's just try out turning this into a paragraph. And where would we add transitional words and phrases throughout the classifying design? So in past videos, you've heard me talk about the importance of transitional words and phrases. They are critical. And we're not just talking about first, then, next, last, and finally. Those are what we call the megaphone transitions, and they're fine here and there in writing, but what we really want to see students do is incorporate much more subtle transitions. So there is a resource within here for you to use to help your students come up with more subtle transitions in their writing. And the reason that we focus on it so much is that we know high scoring writing across the country, no matter the grade level, it has about a transitional word or phrase per sentence. So we need to definitely make sure that we're incorporating them in. And as students become more comfortable with them, they will begin to incorporate them more naturally. So here is a beginning list for you that you are welcome to use with your children of lots of transitional words and phrases. And the one that I would encourage you to put a star by is the second from the last one, to sequence or show time, because there's a lot of more subtle ones in terms of after or once or before, and those lead into phrases which are absolutely the more lead to more subtle transitions. So after examining this point, we're going to add in this one, or once that step is complete, and we move into this one. So the more subtle phrases can be built by a lot of the words that you see in that sequence and show time section. So star that one. Keep all these handy though, because you see you've got the purpose down the left side or the left column, and then transitional words and phrases there that exemplify or that are used for the purpose on the left. So we've written out loud, and we'll practice this here in just a minute with a topic, but we've written out loud, we've added transitional words and phrases in, and then step 5 now is to add in a closing, an opening, and a title in that order. So a lot of times what we see with students writing is that they start at the top of a paper and they'll say, hi, my name is Amber, and I'm going to tell you all about dolphins. And that's their opening. And then they get into some great information, but the opening is so weak. It's so basic, because how do they know what they're going to share about dolphins yet? Because they don't know the organization. They don't have their paper plan. They're just filling up the first line, and then they're going to get into their content. So what we like to do in Writing with Design is actually build writing in a more common sense way. And just because the opening is the first thing we read doesn't mean it's the first thing we write. So we like to save it till the end. So let's talk about the purpose of the closing for a minute. I'd like everybody to take their hand like this and wiggle your fingers. And I want you to see how all of your ligaments come together kind of right in the middle of your hand. And I want you to tap right there. That's exactly like the center of a brainstorming design. So you can see it, the picture on the left here on the screen of the child tapping their palm right here. But if you think about this, all of these lines are representing the lines with the bubbles with all the ideas of everything we've read and researched. And what we want to do is find, how are they all connected? What goes in that box in the middle? What is the takeaway? What's the thread that binds them all? And that's another way of thinking about main idea, or the takeaway message, or what we want to leave readers with in terms of, why did we write this? Why did we take time to research this, other than it was an assignment, right? I'll give you that. Sometimes we just have to complete an assessment or an assignment. But still, there's got to be value and power in the message and the information that we shared. So what do we want to leave our readers with, right? Our teachers, our parents, our fellow classmates, what do we want them to remember about dolphins or about the Civil War? Let your readers know what the big takeaway message is. So this should be a summation, a much more the main idea statement than the opening is for what your writing was all about. There's some other kind of do's and don'ts over here in the brainstorming design. So feel free to come back to this and talk these through with your children. Think about what we want to put in the closing. And one really big one that I'll encourage you to think about is not restating the prompt. So if the prompt was, write about how volcanoes and earthquakes are similar and different, our closing does not need to be, and that's how volcanoes and earthquakes are similar and different. Right? That's just a restatement. There's no thought there. We want students to have a bit more of a main idea takeaway. So something like, while earthquakes and volcanoes produce different types of damage, they are both natural disasters that people and communities must be prepared for. Right? That's way more of a message, of a takeaway, a sentence that I want readers to hold on to and remember. We have off-limits closings. So these are really fun to not do anymore. So no, thank you for reading. No, that's all I have to say about, and definitely no, the end, right? We know it's the end because the writing stops. So we don't need to fill up our paper with that anymore. So if you see your children doing that, just let them know we don't want to do that anymore. You can tell them that Miss Amber said not to do it, or even let them cut it off. If they're adding it to their paper, they can cut it out. I really hate seeing it at the end of children's books personally, because it just sets our children up to do it. And there's just no reason to add that to the writing. It was just something that we call a filler. And we're not about that. We want students to have the strategies to become great writers, not just fill up a sheet of paper. So here are 4 transitional words for closings. We have more within Writing with Design, but these are 4 that we teach at every grade level to every student. They're the first 4 we teach. Indeed, truly, clearly, overall. And we just want students to have those memorized and pull them out every time they do a piece of writing that's at least, a few sentences long, to have some kind of wrap-up sentence. So indeed, truly, clearly, overall. Say it with me. Indeed, truly, clearly, overall. Those 4 words, they are interchangeable, which makes them really easy to use for younger children or for our English learners. So there's not a lot of, well, it needs this because of the way English works. No, we can just say, you choose your favorite, or which one have you not used yet in a piece of writing. And so you get some variety here. They feel like they're making choice, but they're all appropriate, accurate choices. And then you've got a couple options here in terms of strategies that we can recap and connect several points. That's really what we did with our hand here, where we tapped in the middle. That's the connective piece. And that's what our closing needs to be. Or you can make a comparison where we're saying, unlike something else, and then we go into our topic. So I really like the recap and connect one. It's truly one of my, well, it's the first one we teach. It's the essence of closings, and it just allows you to kind of look at all your bubbles and think about, what is the gist? What is the takeaway? And you can see on the right here with the brainstorming design, we have indeed, truly, clearly, overall kind of sprinkled in there, but we have additional transitional words and some phrases as well. So this is what we call our developing list. It's a little bit more complex of a list, so feel free to use some of these for your closings as well if you are ready. But remember, these 4 are gems as well, and we want to always include these. And then for openings, these strategies for openings, or these kind of details about openings, are basically saying that it needs to hint at what the writing's going to be about, but it shouldn't give it away. So we don't need to kind of tell what we're going to write about, then tell what we just told everybody. That kind of formulaic setup for writing doesn't really help children become high quality writers. So what we want them to do is think more like an umbrella. Right? We want them to think about that it shades the writing, it covers it. But if I'm a raindrop up above the umbrella, or a seagull, if it's a beach umbrella, right, I can't see what's underneath that umbrella. I don't know if there's a ham sandwich, or just somebody sitting, right? I don't know if there's something, what's under there. I just know there's an umbrella or a raindrop. I don't know if it's a child holding the umbrella or an adult, right? All I know is that I see an umbrella, and that's the goal here, is just shade the writing, cover the writing. What is the topic without telling away everything that you're going to tell in the writing, or giving away everything you're going to tell in the writing. Another way to think about it with the pizza on the screen is that it's like the pizza cooking in the oven. It's pizza, it's not cookies, right? It's not turkey, it's pizza, but you don't know what it tastes like yet, right? You haven't had the bite. So it's just that overview. And we have lots of off-limit openings as well. This is why we save it till the end to write it, because it's hard to give that umbrella, that orientation to the writing without knowing what the writing's all about. So lots of off-limit ones here. So teachers and families, this is a really good resource to share with students, to say, we're just not going to do these anymore. So if we can't do this, what can we do? Well, here's 3. We can make a general statement. We go through who or what did what, when, and where, those 4 components in a classifying design, those 4 branches. You can pose a thought-provoking question. So that's critical to remember, that it needs to be thought-provoking, in the sense that we don't just want to ask yes or no questions. And then finally is to make a comparison. So that's a closing strategy as well. And it can absolutely work really well as an opening strategy too, where we compare our topic to something else just to get us in to our piece of writing. Lastly, for titles, you've got lots of strategies down the left-hand side here, and then examples on the right. And while titles are not a requirement in any set of standards at the state or national level, what we love about titling and writing with design is that it gets our children to think about, who's my audience? Who's reading this? Whether it's my teacher or classmates or the VFW, who is reading this assignment? That's what I want. That's what we want all students to think about, so that they already are getting creative and already thinking about, how am I going to draw somebody in to read my writing by just the first few words that I put as far as my title. So some people call an opening a hook, but we argue that every word, every sentence that we write should be a hook. So our title simply is the first hook that our readers are going to read. Here are a few kind of general rules about capitalization. We always want to capitalize the first word of a title. You can also err on the side of just capitalizing every word in a title. That will always be okay. But we do tend to lowercase articles and coordinate conjunctions and prepositions. So those three categories of words we typically do not capitalize. And then again, kind of more common words, we don't capitalize if they're short and common. But again, takeaway from this is when in doubt, capitalize it. So we're going to pause here. I'll come back with a second video where we're going to try all of these great strategies out.